Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of the last sessions at this very dramatic Cliveden, where many of the things that have happened in the last 2 days have made it into the national press as we speak. Revelations of espionage, new political parties, the BBC, many other things I'm sure you've all seen. So this afternoon I'm delighted to have with me Bret Easton Ellis, and we're going to talk about his new book, White. But we're also just going to talk about just about everything else we can think of. And we're going to take lots of questions, so please all think of one.
Yes.
How to describe Bret? Okay, it's simple. Someone's done it for me here. It's a writer, critic, lover, hater, tweeter, free speaker, transgressive, white privileged male. Which of those is your favourite, Bret? I think transgressive is the sort of sexiest, isn't
free
it?
Speaker.
Free speaker.
Free speaker.
Free
Is my favorite.
speaker.
Yes, definitely. I cannot believe so many people are here in the rain on a Sunday.
It's fun, isn't it?
I can't believe it.
But you're just going to think this is an English cliche.
It is, I guess, but
Yeah.
I don't know, but anyway,
Yeah.
it's remarkable.
Well, it's great to have you here.
Thank
Go on.
you.
Yeah.
It's great to be here. I mean, this is like a 5-star literary festival. This is really nice. I mean, this is all I have to do.
Yes.
For 3 days of like 5-star, like lavishment, and I just have to do 1 hour is crazy.
I know.
They should have worked me a lot harder. You really should have gotten your money's worth.
Well, I was going to say you better make this our count.
No pressure. No
Yeah, no
pressure.
pressure.
No, I'm not. I'm going to just be myself. I'm
Yeah,
just going to be the free
yourself.
speaker that I am.
Yeah. So to start with, what does white privileged male mean? Just to start with.
It means nothing. It's a new.
I know that, but what does it really? What does it mean in meaning nothing?
It means that it stems from the identity politics movement, and it's just a way to undercut, use as a pejorative, a new name for the patriarchy.
Right.
And that's what it is. And it's kind of a joke, and I always thought that using this as the title, I was actually going to call this book White Privileged Male, because it really is the musings of a white privileged male, and it really is my point of view. But really, what does it ultimately mean? And my editor thought it was too jokey. My editor said, as we were putting this book together, he said, this is a slightly more serious book than what that title infers, so we simply decided to get rid of privileged male and just simply call it White, which is really about the book's argument, which is really how you need to stay calm in certain turbulent times in order to not lose your judgment and not to go totally off the rails and crazy, no matter how much you're bothered by things, no matter how much things are affecting you. And it's about neutrality, and it's about kind of having to have that neutrality in order to survive, or else I do think you get sucked up into something quite dismal, unhappiness.
So is it white as in... Is it Joan Didion or the Beatles' White Album?
It's Joan Didion.
Okay.
Joan Didion wrote a book called The White Album, famous collection of essays. That is my favorite collection of essays, and that's kind of why I wanted to use the word white somehow as some sort of like disparate connection to Joan Didion.
Well, it's a signal, because like being white is so transgressive now and unfashionable.
In certain circles, I suppose, I don't necessarily think that,
No.
but I think there's a way of looking at that suggests perhaps this is true. I mean, in certain bubbles, this is true, but overall, I don't know how much stock I can place in that. I mean, really, what can you do about it?
There's nothing you can do about it.
Really, what can
I
you
mean,
do
the
about
only
it?
thing you can do about it is certainly not acceptable. Which is to follow. The Prime Minister of Canada tried that, didn't he?
He did,
and that didn't go down too well. Quite rightly.
Yeah, that's true.
No. So tell me, what bubble do you live in LA? You say you lived in a bubble. Tell me about your life in LA.
I actually don't live in a bubble. I'm one of the few people who don't live in a bubble. And I discovered this during the last 3 years or so of the terrible turbulency that has racked our country, my country, which is the election of Donald Trump and leading up to that. And I really found out that despite living in blue wave California, which means that most of the coast is securely Democratic, securely liberal, actually the rest of the state is quite red. But I found out that I don't live in a bubble because I knew a lot of people who are on both sides of the aisle. I knew Trump voters, and I knew people who loathed Trump. But I didn't live in a bubble. Most of my friends however, did live in bubbles. And there's a long passage near the end of White where I talk about their meltdowns, their privileged meltdowns, actually, and how they just could not absolutely see anything beyond their bubble, and that's why they were so unhappy. And that's kind of a problem. But I don't necessarily live in a bubble. Though overall, of course, I do, because I live in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And Hollywood has become unhinged over what's happened.
How unhinged?
Unhinged to the point...
Identity politics we're talking about.
No, unhinged to the point where Deborah Messing and Eric McCormick, who both star in Will and Grace, asked the Hollywood Reporter to take names at a Trump fundraiser in Bel Air so they can know who to work with and who not to work with. Things like that.
Yeah.
That's unhinged, and that's happening in Hollywood. And that gets a little bit of news. It trends on social media, but that's how it represents itself.
But that's also happening here in England, of course. There's sort of Brexit sort of people are making lists. I don't know how...
Making lists.
Making lists
is
a very bad
make
sign,
lists
isn't it?
Again? Like
it's a very
McCarthy,
bad sign.
It is a bad time.
I mean, shopping lists are about the only lists one should make, really. You know, but...
Or lists of people you want to sleep with.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. Are you still making those lists?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I just had to ask that.
No, I'm not.
Because I know you were a great admirer of Richard Gere once.
Once upon a time.
And that was...
But I'm not making those lists.
No, okay. So I'm going to jump around a lot, because that's the whole fun of having a long career like yours with many fascinating twists and turns. I mean, you became famous at 17, 18, 21?
21.
21. You became famous at 21.
Yes. I did.
How does that change people? Does that mean you never had a sort of late adolescence in a way?
I think what it does, and I forgot who said this, that the moment you become famous, you become frozen. And you really never get beyond. Like they say this about child stars all the time, that the moment you become famous, you become frozen at that age, and you really never get any older than that.
How nice.
There's something about that just locks you in, and you're frozen. Your mindset's frozen because fame is so overpowering. I don't know. 21, yes, I became famous in a literary way, not in a movie star or a rock star way, in a literary way, which you could then. You could become famous in the literary world in the way that I was. But overall, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up around the media and movie people, more or less. And fame was nothing I was necessarily chasing. It wasn't like the end being of what I wanted to do. It just is something that happened to me. I hadn't planned on this, but it just happened to me, and I kind of drifted through it until here I am today.
But when you said you were on the edge of Hollywood, tell me about your father and your life, your household. Tell me about young Bret Easton Ellis.
Household was, looking back now, was securely upper middle class, even though we lived in an unfashionable part of Los Angeles, which was the San Fernando Valley. I didn't live in the ritziest parts of LA, like Bel Air, Beverly Hills, or the west side of Los Angeles. And it was like many of my friends' childhoods. It was essentially parentless. We were left alone to our own devices a lot. There were no helicoptering parents. I found myself to be navigating the world on my own, becoming an adult on my own, really without any kind of parental aid. And again, one of the weird things about growing up in Southern California is that it's so beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, and yet you have these domestic problems within the house. My father's alcoholism, my parents' marriage was deteriorating, I found out I was gay. All of these were kind of troubling things that had to be figured out. And it was a kind of a dark house, and that's the one thing that I really remember, the disconnect between beautiful Southern California and then the darkness that was going on in the house. And I couldn't wait to get out. I couldn't wait to escape and go back east and go to college.
But isn't a dark house essential training for a novelist?
Completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not being the prom king and not being the captain of the football team and not being super popular, all of those aid you in wanting to become a writer. Yeah. That's completely true. And having an extremely troubled relationship with your father. That is super key.
What did he do, your father?
He was a real estate investment analyst, which meant that he would, someone would hire him, he would survey a building that the prospective buyer wanted to buy, and then he would tell them how much he thought it was worth. And then he would collect a fee, a percentage of that, of the sale. And so, but he really didn't make a lot of money until my parents were divorced, and then I was off to college. And he also died in debt. So it was not, he was a very troubled figure, a very troubled man. And so it was, but he's still vital to me wanting to become a writer.
Yeah.
And so I've forgiven him for all, well, he's been dead for a long time now, but I have forgiven him for all of the shit he put us through.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to, and that felt good to forgive. But it was. You're right. It was the perfect storm to become a writer. All of the stuff, the troubled household, the alcoholism, my gayness, my feeling very solitary, very alone from my friends. It all helped.
The gayness is fascinating because Less Than Zero is not purely a gay book, is it? It's like I read it a long time ago when it came out. There's a lot of sex in it, which
Yes.
of course I loved at the time.
Right.
And it's all very transgressive, and it feels like anyone could do just about anything to anybody. And we thought that reading it in kind of reigning England, we thought that was very Californian and very, very dark and very decadent.
Yeah.
But there's the straight sex that seems gay, and there's gay sex that seems
That sounds fine.
Well, it's all good. This is all good, isn't it? I mean, this is no wonder it was a bestseller. What I'm saying is, how gay were you when you wrote it?
On the gay scale.
If you want to call it that, but where were you? When did you come out? Tell me that.
I never came out.
You never came out?
No, I never came out. I came out publicly, I think, in the New York Times in 2005. But I never came out. I never felt the need to come out. I never came out to my parents. It was just sort of something that had happened to me and that I had to deal with. And I knew from a very young age. I mean, I really knew from like 7 or 8 that something was off. And why was I looking at Alex more than I was looking at Cynthia or whatever the situation was? So I got it, I understood it, and I processed it on my own. And it never really was something that I was that devastated about or tormented about.
No, but nor should you have been.
No, of course. But there are countless, And look, most of my friends and I were bullied, and it went without comment. I mean, your parents didn't do anything. The school really didn't do anything. So it was kind of, I just took it like I took everything else, and it was, but you know what? It's interesting because gay readers located something gayer in that book than perhaps straight readers did. And I think it is strange for a 19, 20-year-old writer to write a novel where there is a massive subplot in the book involves gay prostitution. I don't know how many straight male writers would be drawn toward that. But that was also based on certain experiences I had where I did know certain guys in my high school who seemed to be rather, I don't know, louche with older men. Yeah. And it was just a different era. I remember this night as kind of an example. There was a man named Ronnie Levin who was murdered by Joe Hunt, who was the head of the Billionaires Boys Club. This all happened in Los Angeles in the 80s. But in 1979, I think I was 15, and I had a bunch of friends I went to school with. And one of my friends had become friends with Ronnie Levine, who was in his late 40s, and my friend happened to be living in an apartment next to him. And Ronnie invited us all out on a school night in his convertible Rolls to go to a roller disco and gave us some Coke. And then we all went home. I mean, that's kind of, when I look back at that, I think that was kind of my life, and we were all fine. None of us wanted to call the police or anything. It was sort of like...
There was no Me Too moment.
No Me Too moment, no victim moment, certainly. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, well, this is also the world of adults, and we wanted to become adults. That's the other thing that I find so strange now. Living in a world without adults and without parental, authority, it kind of it forced you to grow up, and you wanted to grow up, and you wanted to end in that independent world of adults. So all of us were looking forward to that. We couldn't wait to get to cocktail parties and meet people and have sex and go, it was all quite, to get out of childhood was part of our goal. It wasn't to stay in childhood, and it wasn't to, schedule our year around Comic-Con or when the latest Marvel movie is released or, cosplay 5 times a month. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's very, very different when I see, when I compare and contrast these two generations.
So do you think this sort of new Puritanism, this new prurience, this new sort of identity politics, do you think it's ruining the fun in life?
Oh, of course it is. It is. It's completely, and we're being told by its critics, you have to adapt. You have to adapt. So we have to adapt into a world of no fun. Well, I guess if that's the choice, I suppose it is. What I mind the most is that it denies adulthood.
Yeah.
It's not that everything is like racist and sexist and homophobic or whatever, and that's why they're using this as an example. You can't say this anymore. You've got to apologize for this. It's the idea that we can't be offended.
Yeah.
Like, I can't be offended. Okay, so I'm offended by something. Or I don't want to watch something, I'm going to turn away. Or I don't like that painting, I'm going to walk down the hall to another painting. And if, a baker is not going to make me a fucking cake, I'll go to the next bakery and get a cake made. I mean, it's sort of like that's the world. The world is hard.
Yeah.
The world is hard for everybody.
Yeah.
And, you kind of, and actually in the United States right now, the world really isn't that hard for anybody. And yet the victimization level is through the roof. Pretty good in the United States in terms of like freedoms for pretty much everyone, and you'd think we lived in some sort of dystopian Handmaid's Tale future where everyone is, completely jailed and victimized, and they can't, they can't do anything without having a fucking breakdown. I mean, it's just not true. It's just not. That's not how it is. But that's how it's being presented by certain factions of the media.
So, what advice do you have to people here in the audience and people who are going to listen to this as a podcast? What advice do you have to them to beat the new offendedness?
Well, it depends.
Without being destroyed by the offense police.
It depends on first of all, it depends on how badly you want to sleep soundly at night and how much you can live with yourself. You make that choice. Some people can't. Some people out in Hollywood have families. They have kids in private schools. I know small business owners who just will not say what they think because they think it will ruin their businesses. Terrible, terrible way to live. And I'm single. I really don't care. It's very hard to have a podcast, to write books like this, to write articles, and pretend you're something you're not.
Yeah.
That is the problem. And so for me, the chips have to fall where they may, and if I lose jobs, which I have, or if I'm not invited to certain parties, which I have not been invited to, that's just how it has to be, because otherwise, you're not an authentic person.
So
you're not authentic.
Have
you're
you?
fake.
I mean, that's interesting.
You're a fake person.
Have you, Bret Easton Ellis, have you been blacklisted from parties of people that you know because you've said outrageous tweets because you're a free speaker?
I would say probably I have. And I have definitely been. It's not even that I've said outrageous things. It's that I haven't aligned myself with the groupthink in Hollywood. I have simply not aligned myself to the hysteria that's going on. And if you just question it, then you might be a little banned. And I've noticed that's perhaps true. But I was already phasing myself out of the social life in Hollywood anyway, so the timing was kind of perfect. So I could say what I want and not feel bad that I wasn't invited to this Grammy party or someone's house for dinner. I also have to say I've met a lot of people in Hollywood who feel the same way I do, and there is a band of them, and they're very welcoming. So I don't know. Look, I'm not someone who's wandering around Hollywood with a MAGA hat on, talking about how much I support Donald Trump. That's not happening. And so when I say this small banning here and there, I'm not invited to certain parties, it's only that. It's not like, I think people know through my work and through interviews and stuff that I'm a bit of a, I just say what I feel, but I don't think that I'm promoting hate speech or I'm not promoting anything that's so out there that I'm not invited to some things,
So,
which I don't even go to.
So jumping back again, we're going to come back to this obviously, but just jumping back and forth because it's fun. When you became famous, you were you were living in a dormitory on the East Coast at your university, your college. So in your especially for those of us, I know a lot of young people here. What is it like becoming famous while at university? While at uni, as we call it here. What is that like? How do other people treat you? I mean, is everybody suddenly crawling up to you and begging you to date them, buy them drinks? How does it work?
I already went through that my freshman year. So I had that when I first got to Bennington. I was a bit popular. Yeah. For whatever reason. I became a new person. I reinvented myself. And so I had a very good time my freshman year at Bennington. And I got that all out of the way. I went to a very, very small university. We're talking about 600 people in the further reaches of Vermont. We were very far away from anybody. It was a very posh college. It was very nice. And yet half the people were on financial aid. Half the people were like the sons of the scions of industry. It was a very strange mix. And so how famous you could be on that campus really wasn't that, like you weren't suddenly big man on campus. No. You were still Bret. on this very small campus with a limited amount of people. So I really didn't feel it. And also it happened so much more slowly then. I remember when you would get articles about you sent up Federal Express. I mean, there was, of course, no internet or anything. So you'd wait 2 days, and then you'd get a review with your picture on it. I mean, it wasn't as if there was this media that existed that was so huge that you became like a star overnight. And actually, it took a long time, because when my first book came out, my publishers printed 3,000, 4,000 copies. They didn't really have any faith in it. They were zero money for advertising. And so it was a word of mouth book. It happened very slowly. It was published in the spring of 1985, and then it moved very slowly through the summer of 1985, and it didn't really become a bestseller until mid-autumn. It all happened very slowly, so I didn't really feel it. I never felt it. And I'm glad I didn't feel it. It wasn't really until I moved to New York a couple of years later, after I graduated, that I began to feel the effects of it. And that was...
Yeah. And then you were part of the Brat Pack, sort of a Brat Pack of writers / actors, Jay McInerney and people like that, weren't you?
I was.
And are you still? I mean, has he criticised you, or what's your relationship with him, for example?
Jay McInerney and I published books within the same year. His was the East Coast version of mine. Mine was the West Coast version of him. A young protagonist, lost in the big city, doing drugs, having sex. I suppose the publishing industry had not seen these books before, because both of them became rather big bestsellers. Okay, so Jay and I were thrown together. I do not think that Jay and I would ever have been friends otherwise. Very, very different people. I've grown to love him. We've known each other now for over 35 years. But very, very different people with very different attitudes about things and the way we look at life. Bright Lights, Big City, his book is very romantic, very Fitzgeraldian. He's in love with language. I came out of kind of the punk movement, minimalism, numbness as a feeling, as I like to say. And that's what Less Than Zero was. So we were very far away from each other, but we liked each other and we got on. In the later years, there have been a couple of things that have happened that have made Jay mad at me. I made one of his characters the victim of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. He hated that. She's attacked quite brutally.
How could he hate that?
He hated it.
It's a compliment.
He loved his character, and I don't know why I did it. I think he didn't pick up the check or something, and I just got mad that night, and I went home and I was doing American Psycho, and it said, Allison Poole is going to be beaten by Patrick Bateman, and sometime. He didn't like that. I also made him a character in Lunar Park, which is a novel I wrote that I published in 2005, where the book is really about, it's a novel, it's kind of a Stephen King haunted house novel, but I, the real Bret Easton Ellis, is actually the narrator and the star of this novel, and some of my real life friends make appearances, and one of them is Jay. And so I have Jay I live in this house with my wife and my fake kids in Connecticut or Midlands someplace, and I'm having a Halloween party, and Jay comes to the Halloween party and, of course, brings me Coke, because that's what Jay always used to do. He was like the Bolivian marching powder guy. Yeah. And so the fake Bret and the fake Jay are doing Coke in the fake house in the fake novel, and I actually think this is one of the most sympathetic things about Jay that has ever been written. But he just said, he told me, he said, I can't believe you put me in this book in this scene. I have children. What are they going to say when they see this? Their father's doing Coke in a garage. And I said, it's a work of fiction. It's all imaginary. Why do you care? And then lately, Jay has been pissed a bit about this, because Jay is in this book. He's not named, but it's near the end. And there's this sequence in the book where I go to dinner after dinner after dinner with very rich, entitled friends of mine who are all breaking down over Trump and the Electoral College. And it's just so fucking tiresome. I'm just sitting there dinner after dinner at Spago, the Beverly Hills Hotel. $1,000 are spending on a bottle of wine, and they're complaining about Trump. It's awful. It was just awful. And he's one of those people. Because Jay married into the Hearst fortune and is fabulously wealthy now. And so he is, but I still love him. Yeah. But he is in this book, and he didn't like it, and he recognized himself. And his problem is that I have called Jay part of the coastal golden elite who live in this bubble that don't get anything outside of their bubble except references to themselves, like looking in a mirror all day long. And he thinks that I am part of that. and that for whatever reason, something happened to me that has caused me to move to the middle of the aisle now. And he thinks it goes all the way back to American Psycho. He thinks I got wounded by the publication of this book to such a degree that I have become over-invested in free speech, matters of free speech and free expression. And that is why now I am having a hard time with the authoritarian language police that are roaming academia, roaming the media, roaming Hollywood. And I think you should be. And I think Jay is very comfortable and cozy in his world and doesn't quite get what's kind of going on. That was an extreme. I don't want to talk about Jay McInerney that much.
No, let's not talk. Let's not.
I don't even want him brought up.
Yeah.
And you brought him up, and then I automatically go off on him.
Off you went. Okay, let's
God, I'm
just
just like sweating now.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna rub that out. We're just gonna carry on. So let's go to American Psycho, which of course you're asked about. I'm sure everyone here has read that book, and I mean the fascinating thing about it was the fact that it was kind of pulled. It was pulled by your publisher, wasn't it, Simon & Schuster, and then bought by Sonny Mehta at Random House, and then became a mega hit for them. So we just want to tell. I know you've told it a million times. Just tell us what it was like to be in that storm at that moment.
I've been contracted to write a third novel by Simon & Schuster. They didn't even ask for anything other than what is it about? And I wrote my editor a letter. I said, I'm writing a novel about a serial killer in Wall Street, and he's a yuppie, he's a serial killer, blah, 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 blah. And so I write the book. It takes me about 3 years, and I turn the book in. And it is not the book that I think my mainstream publishing house expected. They expected, well, where's the girl that the serial killer's after? Where's the detective that's going after the serial killer? There's just hundreds of pages here of a serial killer. And he's psychotic. And he's talking about Huey Lewis in the news for 7 pages. And he's noticing what everyone's wearing. And yes, it is true. Something shifted when I began actually writing American Psycho. I thought it was going to be a more traditional novel, a more mainstream novel. And instead, I just got caught up in the times. I got caught up in my own kind of celebrity in that moment. All of these things came together, and I believed that I was living in a kind of my own unhinged drama. And so I started to pour these feelings into this book. And I thought, by the end of it, I had written an experimental novel. And a completely experimental novel that was going to sell 10,000 copies. And then I was going to write my big commercial novel that was going to be brilliant and literary, and everyone was going to read it, and that was Glamorama, and that didn't happen. So authors are notorious about not getting what is going to be their biggest hit. So anyway, I turned it in, and the House canceled the book. The House actually didn't cancel the book. It was the corporation, this was new, the corporation that owned the publishing entity that decided to cancel the book. And this was a very worrisome moment in publishing because it suggested that the publishers were not in control of the books they wanted to publish and what they could. And that the corporation, who has nothing to do really with the publishing house, can decide. And that is what happened. Dick Snyder, who was the head of Simon & Schuster, did not make that decision, even though he was the fall guy. And he publicly took, even though he told me privately, it was the people who ran Gulf and Western who made that decision. It was bad for the brand. And so what was it like? I don't know. I mean, it was, when you had the entire media against you, and you had the New York Times trying to kill the book, not get it published by Random House, try to humiliate Sonny in about 11 or 12 pieces during the period from when Simon & Schuster canceled it to when it was ultimately published, that about a 4-month period. You become sensitive to that. You start to see fake news all the time about you, about the advance Sonny gave you, about what's really in the book, about your own motivations. And it was so bizarre. It was the moment where I realized, oh, this is all wrong. This is not the truth about the situation. What does that do to you? I don't know. I think it's probably good for you. I mean, it opens your eyes. You begin to see things a lot more differently. I think you become very sensitive and aware of how information is disseminated. I always believed in the book. And it wasn't for me 300 pages of pornography, dismemberment, and violence. It was a serious book. And I always knew that somehow down the line, that was going to come out and that was going to come through. But it was not a big hit initially. It was, the controversy made it a hit. Yet it did sell steadily for the next 8 or 9 years, and then it really sold a lot when the movie came out.
Yeah, what did you think of the movie, and what was your involvement in the process, and what did you think of the lead and so on?
My involvement was at first quite big because David Cronenberg was the first director attached, with a young guy who'd only been in one movie, Brad Pitt being his choice. So this was already set up, and David wanted me. This was right just when Thelma and Louise was coming out, and there was a lot of heat on Brad Pitt. And so David asked me to write the screenplay. He wanted the author to. And then he told me at this meeting we had, I'll never forget it, and David Cronenberg was a super nice guy. He was wearing like a polo shirt, jeans, he just come from the gym. Nothing like what you would imagine the man who made these movies like The Brood and Dead Ringers was like. He said, okay, I want to do your book. I want to do your book, but the first thing is I don't want any violence. I'm not going to shoot sex scenes. I hate restaurant and club scenes. I don't want to shoot any of those. And I was thinking, okay, that's 100 pages gone, 100 pages gone. Well, what are we left with? What in the hell are we left with? And he said, I really am interested in his apartment. I'm interested in his aesthetic. And I'm interested in shopping and consumerism. That's the things that I want to go on. Of course, there'll be deaths and stuff, but I don't. Restaurant scenes are hell to shoot. They're so boring. So I thought, oh my God, okay, what do I do? Well, I just wrote the script I wanted to write anyway, and I put in a ton of restaurant scenes and club scenes and all these murders. I even put extra murders in. There was like wall-to-wall murder, and I thought, oh, this is a pretty good script. I was kind of bored by the book anyway, and I didn't think it would make a good movie, but anyway, I did the script. Cronenberg hated it. I thought, what in the hell is this? He hired someone else to adapt the book. He hated that screenplay even worse, and then he dropped out. And then Oliver Stone came on board, and Oliver Stone wanted to do it. I mean, and because Oliver Stone was on board, Leonardo DiCaprio wanted to do it. Okay. And Leonardo DiCaprio had just gotten off Titanic. And he was kind of humiliated by Jack Dawson. He wanted to do something that was 180 degrees different than that. So the company that was producing American Psycho was a production company called Lionsgate, and they were willing to pay Leo $20 million to star in this movie. Mary Harron, who eventually directed the movie, was always on the sidelines. After Cronenberg left, Mary Harron kind of sneaked in with this young actor, Christian Bale, and they both really went after Lionsgate and said, we're the right people to do this. We're the right people to do this. And then when Leonardo DiCaprio got involved and Oliver Stone wanted to do it, they were shunted off. There was so much controversy about Leo DiCaprio doing this after Titanic that he withdrew from the project. Oliver Stone withdrew from the project, and then Mary and Christian came back, and then they did the movie. I like the movie. I don't know why you need to turn that book into a movie. Basically, I did another script for it. It's basically the same script that Mary Harron wrote, because there really are only 30 to 35 scenes that you can pull from that book and make into a movie. It's not like, they're obvious. They're the obvious ones, and she chose them. And they were basically the same ones that I chose on my second pass. I like the movie, and I have to say, as a writer, it did help the sales of the book, and it did help the profile of the book, because in many ways, that movie clarifies my intent.
Now, Donald Trump is mentioned a lot in the book and the movie. And I was interested to see, when you did research for American Psycho, you researched the Trumps, didn't you? And their practices, how Trump and his father ran their properties and their racial, their sort of racism in the way that they ran the occupants of their apartments and all that. And you did a lot of research into Trump, or did you just read about him?
We're about halfway through this. You mentioned Trump. It's going to be downhill from here.
I know.
Trump destroys
I've timed
the talk.
it perfectly.
I've done this. I've been doing this for 3 months now. You bring in Trump, at any point, everything goes downhill. So hold on.
Hold on to your seats.
Be prepared. Here we go. I don't know. I mean, some people will be unhappy with this following conversation, but let's have it. I was writing American Psycho in the late 80s, and I started hanging out with a group of Wall Street guys, and for a couple months. Their hero was Donald Trump. Donald Trump then, I think you have to remember, was much better looking. Kind of attractive if that guy is your type. He was seemingly fabulously wealthy. He had the #1 bestseller of that year, The Art of the Deal. All of the guys read it. All of the guys wanted to be Donald Trump. He was their aspirational figure. I thought then, in my mid-20s, that was quite absurd. That why this person? So in the book, Donald Trump becomes an obsession of Patrick Bateman's. He becomes the father figure he never had. He becomes a father figure for the father he never had. And so Patrick Bateman is obsessed with Trump, and Trump is mentioned all the time because Patrick wants to go to the restaurants that Donald Trump goes to. He wants to go to the parties Donald Trump gets invited to. He's obsessed with Donald's wife at that time. It's just this, all this, and he finds himself just wandering in a daze to the Trump Tower and looking up at it and then fantasizing about killing people. I thought it was all rather funny. And I didn't really, I can't say that I'm prescient in any way. It was just something happening in that moment. Donald Trump, Wall Street guys, they loved him. That's how that came about.
Yeah. But I mean, is the Donald Trump of the art of the deal, the guy, the sort of man about town, sort of promoting himself and building his golden towers in American Psycho, is that different from the man who became president and is now president? I mean, we all change in our... We all have an arc, right? An arc of character. I mean,
I don't think he does.
is he the same? Is he frozen?
He is the same.
Is he the same guy, frozen in time?
I think so, and I think that's why a lot of people like him. I think that's why a lot of people like him. He hasn't changed.
So people, the base of Trumpites worship him in the same way that your characters, your investment banker guys, worship him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting, and yet I do think that if I was writing Patrick Bateman now, I think I would certainly make him a Democrat or a liberal. Yeah. I certainly would make him someone obsessed with, I don't know, whoever is the poster boy or poster girl right now. I think that would be interesting.
You don't think Patrick Bateman would be working in the Trump White House?
Silicon Valley.
You think?
I think Silicon Valley.
Do you think he'd be in charge of immigration policy at the Trump White House?
Well, there is a figure in the Trump White House, Stephen Miller,
That's
who
what I was thinking.
I tweeted about that I want to write a novel about him very badly. He's
But
fascinating.
Perhaps you have.
Perhaps
you've written that book already.
Well, you know, he grew up in the private school set in Los Angeles, so I don't know. And he's very young. Does anybody know who we're talking about?
Yeah,
we do?
Yeah, you follow
God,
Stephen Miller, head of immigration and speechwriter.
I think Patrick Bateman would be in Silicon Valley. He'd be where the money is, I think, and that's where he'd try to figure things out.
We're going to ask questions in a minute. Just tell me, what next? Are you thinking about? This is your first non-fiction book, right? It's been about 10 years since you've published any fiction, and anything.
Yeah, it is. 10 years.
So I've got two more questions, and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor. So please think of something. You're thinking about a fiction again, a novel, something. I am French. Something inspired by Paris.
No, there was a novel that I was going to write a long time ago, and it involves something very terrible that happened to me and a couple of my friends in high school, and it played out about over a term, 1980. And I have been thinking about this novel for 15 years. And I just wanted to make movies and create a TV series instead. I felt that I'd written my novels. I'd written a lot of novels. I feel a lot of novels. I think 6 or 7 books is a lot. I don't know what more I have to prove. And that's not why I write novels, but it's sort of like, people say, more novels. And why? So I have been thinking about this. And it's pre-Lesson Zero. It goes way before that. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And that's really how novels start. You can't stop thinking about them, and you have to write them down. And I haven't felt this way in 10 years. So that might be a possibility. And then I'm thinking of doing something for Audible books, doing just a purely Audible, long-form piece of fiction. And yet I still want to get money to direct this movie that I wrote and dabble with that. So, but it's also tiring, and 10 years in development for very many things, even though you're paid, sometimes well paid, sometimes okay paid, there gets to be a point where it's just not acceptable anymore, and it's just a time after time after time, things don't work out.
So last question, and then we're going to open the floor. Is tell me about the ideological warfare going on within your own house with your partner, who you sometimes describe as, well, a Marxist-Leninist. Sometimes, I mean, you're very promiscuous with your ideological labels when it comes to your partner.
I am.
What the hell's going on in your house?
It's over in terms of that problem that we had.
Okay,
we're still together.
So
We've been together
worried.
10 years. I often refer to him as the millennial communist, millennial socialist, which is very, very easy to be when you live in a high-rise in West Hollywood and I'm paying for all the bills. So it's very easy to be that. And I tell him that all the time. It's very easy to feel this way when you haven't seen my property taxes and whatever. Something happened during the election. I moved more to the center, he moved further to the left. And we started to get into horrible fights about it. And it really did crack in the summer of 2018, which I describe in the last chapter of this book, where we just were very much on opposite sides on things, and yet kind of within the same aesthetic, let's say, the same aesthetic. We both looked at the world in the same way, and that's why we've been together for 10 years. And yet there was this thing that we both vehemently disagreed upon. And I think a lot of it had to do with me being older and more cynical about things and realizing that it's nice to think these things, but utopias are impossible to reach when he still is, he still believes in these things and whatever. And he became more and more disappointed in everything as the Trump administration moved on. And then the Mueller report kind of destroyed him. And he was very quiet for a week. And then like a little mouse, he came out and stopped following the mainstream media that he was following, and now is following just the craziest alt-left shit you can find. And we don't fight anymore. We don't fight anymore.
Are you just before we get, are you following stuff in England at all? What's going on here?
I try not to, but it's impossible.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of, Boris Johnson, could he be a Bret Easton Ellis character? How do you follow Brexit and all what the agony that's going on here? You don't have to have an opinion. It's very ridiculous, but.
Yeah, it is very ridiculous.
Yeah. Should we just move on?
Yeah, and I'm really not. I'm not well versed enough to throw out an opinion and just have it splat against the wall. I really don't know.
Okay, good. Let's just. Sorry, carry on.
No,
Shall we take some questions now? Anyone would like to ask a question, because we've got time for questions. Yeah, please.
My brother's a white male privileged gay living in Canada, and we had a row last Sunday. I'll talk to him after this, and I said I would ask you about seahorse. What are your views on seahorses? As you'll know, seahorses are transgenders.
They are.
Who change from men to women, transition fully, and give birth to their own children. I said that was perfectly acceptable. Paul said, you are a psycho. And I said, don't you dare say American psycho. I might be bipolar and psychotic, but I do not go around killing people.
Okay, wait. We've had the question, haven't we? So, Bret, do you want to answer that very difficult question? Very challenging question. That's a very challenging. Have you ever had a question that challenging before?
It was reason enough to come here this weekend.
Good.
To hear that question was reason enough. I thought it was like this fabulous dinner I had the other night. No, the seahorse question will forever be burned in my mind.
Okay.
I love it.
Thank you. Okay, let's have another. Yeah. Natalie.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
and
much.
please think of more questions, because we've got.
That was absolutely fascinating. You're going to hate me for this question because I know you're asked it a lot. You interviewed Kim Kardashian.
I did last fall. I interviewed. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes,
What was it like to meet her? Did you meet Kanye? Did he rap for you?
I have had about a 5-year relationship with Kanye West on working on various projects. I talk about this also in Light. And so I knew him, and I vaguely knew her because of our working relationship. None of these projects really happened. It's hard to pin Kanye down, but he is fascinating. He's fascinating to work with, and I think he's a genius. And like all geniuses, he's a bit crazy. And I like that about him. There's a high-end kind of sex porn magazine called Richardson by this Brit Andrew Richardson. And that Kanye loves. It sells about 20,000 copies. It's like $25 to buy. They publish 4 times a year. Kim posed naked in it. And Kanye wanted me to do the interview with Kim. accompanying it. I mean, this isn't really a funny story at all. I mean, it's just that I've seen her a couple of times, I said hello to her, but she came over to my apartment and with her bodyguard, and we sat around and we just talked for about an hour about a lot of things, and I don't know, nobody really cared about the interview. It was pushed off to the side for some reason. It wasn't really, I think the editor of the magazine thought it was going to be a much bigger story, that I was interviewing Kim or Kim was talking to me. But that was it. She's lovely. She's absolutely lovely. I mean, she was in the middle of doing her thing about getting the people out of prison, getting that woman out of prison for the drug offense, and so she was, I think, leaving my place to go back to Washington and free somebody else that day. And I liked her a lot. I like them.
Great. Next question. You at the back, guy at the back. Thanks.
Using your words, how do you break through the ideological bubbles that people wrap around themselves?
You can't. Who said that? You can't. It's impossible. Oh, it's impossible. I've tried. I live with someone. I can't really break through to him. Oh, you can't. It's so rigid. It's so tight right now that you can't do it. And it's worthless to try and do it. So you just have to stay true to yourself and believe in what you believe in and listen to people. I just find out that there is a side that just simply doesn't listen. Simply doesn't listen, will not hold out the hand. Well, the people who don't invite me to places, the people who don't, it really is a problem right now for the left in our country, where there was a poll taken where it said 90% of conservatives or Republicans would invite someone on the other side of the aisle over for dinner and have a drink. I think it was 8% of the left would do the same. It really is crazy, and you see it a lot in America. It's so divided right now. You can't do it. It doesn't get you anywhere. So that's my rather negative answer on that question. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Going to the theory of the pendulum in history, some people believe that all the freedoms that we enjoyed during the Obama years have created this Trump phenomenon where nothing that is civility counts or truth counts or manners count, and that has created what I'm describing as liberal fundamentalism, because all the people that were open and democratic, they feel that they're suffering so much aggression that they should go also totally to one side. If we go with the pendulum here, where are we going next?
Where do we go next? I don't know, but I do think that you're right about this, that there is something, I call it liberal nihilism, or progressive nihilism right now, where suddenly everything after Trump is so awful, so horrible, so apocalyptic. As I said, we're living in the Handmaid's future, dystopian, racist, super racist society where freedoms for everybody are being, relegated to the dustbin. I don't know where we're going next. I have to think that there's pushback on this already. That people can't live under this sort of totalitarian, seeming kind of guidebook on how to live your life and how to express yourself, and be so afraid all the time to express your opinions about things that are just normal and being an adult. So I'm optimistic that there's going to be some kind of pushback on everything that we've all endured the last 3 years, but we'll see. But I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, this lady there.
Hi, I'm from the US and also just wanted to ask, what kind of advice do you have for future writers that are young and maybe in your position currently where you became a young writer? What advice do you have for them to continue forward with their writing?
Look, my advice always for writers, and I give the same advice all the time, the same advice that I gave writers 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago, is always just read. Read a lot. Just read books. You learn so much more from reading books than you'll learn from anything else. And that helps you hone your craft, and that is the only advice I can give. I guess also, to a degree, self-publish. I mean, it's hard to break into whatever the 5 major publishers now, and I think they are looking for stuff like that. If you've been publishing a novel online, that's a way to get your work out there. Print chapters of it and have a link on Facebook or whatever. There are more opportunities to get people to read your work in a way now that there really aren't the gatekeepers anymore. So there is freedom in that sense, but it's always been read and also just stay true to your voice. Don't try to write something because you think it's something that someone else is going to like. That always kind of backfires in a way. And
Okay.
write about anything you want. Don't be afraid of cultural appropriation. Did I say that?
Yeah, any more questions? Any more questions? Yeah. Please, this lady here.
Hi. You come over so grounded with such authenticity. Have you worked all this out for yourself, or have you ever had any professional help?
Do you mean as in see a shrink? Yes. Yes, I have. I had a particularly troublesome moment somewhere in my early to mid-40s where I had the proverbial midlife crisis. And I had a deep black depression, and I just couldn't deal with anything. And so in that moment, I did seek professional help, and it helped immensely. And it was also a short-term guy. I'm embarrassed to say it was kind of like what we call in LA a life coach. I went to the famous life coach, expensive life coach. And I had friends who were sick of my sadness and my depression, and I had a friend who was seeing this expensive life coach who you can't get into. There's a list like a mile long, whatever. And so my friend said, I'm giving you my slot. And I said, and I'm just crying all the time. And it was a thank you. So I remember very clearly driving to the life coach's office. I remember just like blubbering as I walked in the hallway to the life coach's little waiting room. And the life coach took me in and sat down on the couch. And I'm not even looking at him. I'm just blubbering like this big narcissistic mess sitting there. And he's just looking at me oddly and saying, okay, well, tell me your problems. I want to hear what's going on. You seem like a mess. And he said, but I want to tape this. So I want to tape it. I want to tape this session. And I said, that's fine. And so I guess an hour passes, and I've just been talking nonstop, and I've been crying and talking and crying. And then he said, okay, I think I can see you. I'm going to work out a slot for you. We'll come back next week. And then he said, oh, here's a tape. I want you to listen to this. Okay, I said, okay, fine. And I realized I didn't have anywhere to play a cassette. I didn't have anything in my ar. I didn't have anything in my house. My stereo system doesn't have anything for a cassette player. And so I drove over the hill to my mom's house where remember I have a Walkman with all my childhood shit. And I walked past my mom and I said, what are you doing here? And I'm just blubbering. I got to do my Walkman. I'm so sad. It's a mess. And then I get back in the car and I put the Walkman on and I'm crying and I'm driving up the canyon and I put the thing in and I hear this whiny little bitch. I hear this whiny little bitch who's horrible sounding. I really went cold. I pulled over to the side of the canyon and I sat there slumped in my seat listening to this little whiny bitch go on and on and on. And that's when I started getting better. And it was very fast. It was very, very fast.
Yeah.
What involvement, if any, did you have in the stage musical of American Psycho, and did you have any reservations about that material being turned into a musical?
Surprisingly, no. I didn't. I talk about it a bit in White. I go into about how they turned American Psycho into a stage musical, not based on the movie, but based on the book. So I was the one who was being actually paid and optioned out to make this musical happen. Not Lionsgate, not Mary Herron, not those people. So it really is, if they're going to do something about a movie, they're going to do a Broadway stage musical on a movie, from a movie or from a title like that, it usually reverts to whatever that movie was based on and the originator of that material. And so I was that. So on that level, it was good in terms of like being paid weekly to renew, to be paid whatever the money to allow the permission. And I like the musical. I know it opened here first with Matt Smith at the Alameda, and then it moved to Broadway, straight to Broadway, not off Broadway, where it needed some tweaking before it opened there, and it lasted about 2 months. But now there was a version of it in Australia a couple months ago, and they are going to rewrite some of the music and I think try to remount it as a off-Broadway musical. So I am really happy with it, and I thought it was really, really well done.
Great. Yeah.
Quite a serious question, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
In your novels, there's something, as you say, quite minimal, quite raw, quite cruel about your use of language. But at the same time, there's a kind of intimacy or a gentleness that you create for your reader, in my mind anyway. And I just wanted to know what your relationship to language is like.
Oh, my relationship to language. Well, I think language is everything, first of all. I think style is everything. I think every story has been told. I think every character has more or less been presented. It's just the way you present it. And so my belief in style is really my guiding aesthetic principle. It's how you tell it. I mean, I pick up books all the time, and they just don't have a way of being told that interests me more than 2 or 3 pages. A lot of incident can happen, a lot of dramatic stuff can be going on, but if it's really, if it doesn't have a voice, I'm kind of out of there by page 10. I go, I'm off this train. I can, however, read something where pretty much nothing is happening to a degree, and I'm so taken with the author's style and the way he's presented it that I'm mesmerized. I'm reading a book right now by, I think, a British writer named Adam Thirlwell, Lurid and Cute, which kind of opens a little dramatically. But it's just this narrator, I'm on page 100 now, just this narrator in a modern city, a young guy, just talking about his kind of sadness, his depression, his inability to connect with anything, his passivity. And you'd think, God, that sounds so boring. But it really isn't, because of his language, his use of language. So language is pretty much everything. I know people have taken me to task for saying that, and that it really, books are about character, and they're about the story, and about engaging a reader. And I think, well, the way you engage the reader is through language, and so, and a style. And so that's what, I know it sounds so obvious when I say it, but you'd be so surprised how many books don't have that.
Okay, we've got time for what? Yeah, I think there's one right. Is there one over there?
In the new book, you talk about how you hit the zeitgeist a few times by tweeting, and it has a sort of almost out of what you expected effect in a way that you'd never really had before. And I just wondered how you felt tweeting and social media in that way has changed the discourse in America and the way that you can reach people, and how it's opened up the boundaries of things being good, but also things being pretty bad.
Well, for some people, tweeting is great. For Donald Trump, it's great. He uses it really well. And he's combating something. He's in a battle with something. So those tweets seem, in a way, for some people, necessary. And it's very funny that when Donald Trump was tweeting, everyone said, oh my God, this is so unpresidential, he's tweeting. And now I don't think you can start a campaign, any kind of government campaign, without having a Twitter account. Blah, 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 blah. Twitter isn't real. It isn't real, and I think they did a study in the U.S. that said that Twitter basically represents 2% of the population, if that. 2% of the population, and that there's a 98% of population that doesn't use Twitter, that doesn't share the opinions that are expressed on Twitter, and is turned off by the toxicity of Twitter. If you're on Twitter, you're probably, and it's really working for you, you're probably a celebrity with a blue check, though everyone is now getting a blue check, so that's become kind of meaningless. But Twitter for me was, in the early days, the Wild West. It was super fun. You said outrageous shit, everyone screamed, everyone laughed, and then everyone moved on to the next outrage. That's what it was. Dirty jokes, outrageous shit, making jokes about everything, and it was just fun. You looked forward to doing it, and it was very ephemeral. It was over after about 30 seconds. You tweeted, you got the reaction, you got a little bit of a rush, you drank another glass of wine, you thought about tweeting something else. It was just a ball. It was a blast. And then something happened, and it started to become a virtue signaling machine. It started to become this thing of showing you how sensitive you are, and how much you care, and how much you've been victimized by something. All a very cheap way to get people to react to you. And that's when Twitter became unfun, when it became this thing where everything became politicized, people were attacking each other, a joke lost you a job. That's when it became a problem. Many people, for me, thought I should have gotten off Twitter when one night I was home alone and I was watching this Rolling Stone documentary on HBO. My partner had gone out to have fun because he's much younger and he can do that. And I didn't go out that night. And I remember he called me and he said, "Hey, babe, what's going on? I'm over with so-and-so, so-and-so. I'm going to be coming back soon." And I was already semi-passed out, but maybe 2 in the morning. And I remember saying, "Oh, I'll just text you. I'm in bed." And then I thought about something, and so I texted him. I texted Todd. I said, "I want you to bring some cocaine over from Mark and Ronald's house, okay? I think I'm going to be up. Let's party tonight a little bit." And then I passed out again. And then I remember the next morning, I couldn't believe why my phone was buzzing all the time. What's going on? And I realized that I hadn't sent that text to Todd. I had tweeted it. I had tweeted it, and I had tweeted it badly. It said something like, "Come over now, do coke, bring coke, I want some coke." 2:32 a.m. I looked at it. I was absolutely horrified. Todd came into the room and said, "Do you know what you tweeted last night? I never got your text. If I did, I would have brought some over. But I never got it. In fact, it said you tweeted this out." That was the moment many people told me you should lay off Twitter. And after that, I kind of did.
And that is a great moment to stop as well.
Ridiculous
so
moment.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
I just want to say, you're going to sign some of these.
I am.
Yeah. Bret is going to sign all his books over at the bookshop.
Yes.
So see you there, and thank you very much.